11, and it started off in the year 1189. So Frederick Barbarossa, Frederick I, the Holy Roman Emperor, after years of being on the outs with the church at large, is now seeking to go on crusade. He, the King of France, Philip II, and King Richard the Lionhearted of England lead this crusade, but it is ill-fated. Frederick Barbarossa drowns in a stream on the way to the Holy Land, and his troops return back to the empire without completing the crusade. Along the way, Philip II of France grew very sick and returned to France, leaving Richard the Lionhearted by himself to finish out the crusade. And although Richard the Lionhearted had some very impressive victories, he failed to retake Jerusalem. And Saladin was impressed by the bravery and the heroics of Richard the Lionhearted, and agreed to allow Christian pilgrims to come to the Holy City, have access to it, and not to molest them. And so this was Richard the Lionhearted, looking at the forces that he had left at his disposal, agreed to these conditions and returned home. Following this period, the less than full success of the Third Crusade, the crusading ideal begins to be expanded to other areas within Europe itself. The Reconquista in Spain and Portugal, and to the lands threatened by the Catholic heresy in southern France. Another event of great importance during this period between the Third and Fourth Lateran Councils was the disastrous Fourth Crusade. So the Third Crusade failed to retake Jerusalem. In 1201, there was a preaching of another crusade to finish the job that the Third Crusade failed to achieve. This time, the Crusaders were going to sail to Palestine, to the Holy Land, and avoid the dangers of that long passage over land. And the Crusaders began arriving in Venice in the year 1201 for the expedition. Now, about 30 years before this, around Constantinople, a number of Venetians had been killed, mutilated, or blinded by the Byzantine forces, maybe some by citizens, some by soldiers. Venice and Byzantium, the Eastern Empire, Roman Empire, were great merchant rivals at this time. Much of the military power of the Byzantine Empire had been lost, but they were still great merchants at this time. And the growing influence and power of Venice was beginning to threaten Byzantium's wealth, its access. Its access to the wealth of the to the merchant wealth. And so Venice wants a little bit of revenge. The Crusaders arrive in Venice, and the king, the prince, goes by the title the Doge of Venice, Dandolo, at this point is 85 years old at least, and blind. And he convinces the leaders of the crusade, who were not all that competent at this point, to agree to his terms. He will provide them ships and provide them the gear, the provisions necessary for the transport, if they agree to pay a certain price, and the price is not cheap. And if they agreed also to give Venice half of whatever treasures they may gain along the way. Pope Innocent III catches wind of what's happening here and warns the Crusaders not to harm Christians and to go directly to Palestine. This will be ignored, unfortunately. One thing that one matter that distracts the attention of the Fourth Crusade from the Holy Land is the arrival of a displaced prince. Alexius, the son of the deposed Byzantine emperor, Isaac II, arrives in Venice. So his father's been deposed. He thinks he should be the rightful emperor in Byzantium. And he starts making overtures to the Crusaders. If they come to his help, he will give them assistance. And this is proves to be a very dangerous and ultimately disastrous invitation. The number of Crusaders arriving in Venice throughout the year 1202 was far fewer than expected, and the organizers of the crusade had signed on to many more ships than they were able to fill or pay for. And the funds were very short. Now the Doge of Venice, Doge Dandolo, is not that interested in this, it seems, the success of the crusade, but he is interested in his own profit and welfare. He decides to make a generous offer to the Crusaders if they agree to help reconquer this port city, Zara, which now is at this time governed by the King of Hungary. They help him reclaim this port city. He will use that to help pay off the debt they owe him for their contracted debt. Pope Innocent III threatens excommunication for doing this. He finds out that this is something being rumored. A number of the leaders of the crusade become quite scandalized and disillusioned and abandon the crusade at this point. Regardless, the fleet leaves Venice in 1203 and sails into Zara, the port of Zara. They sack the city and the promise of retake it for the crown of Venice. At this point, they're all excommunicated. Pope Innocent III was adamant that they were not to attack other Christians, and this is exactly what they did. And after the sacking of Zara, many of the Crusaders who are on these ships are getting restless. They want to go to the Holy Land, as they had said they would. But now Alexius from Constantinople makes that offer one more time. If they come and help him, he will give them immense treasures, extra troops to ensure victory in the Holy Land, and an end to the schism with the East. This is enough to convince the Doge. It's rather uncertain whether he needed much convincing once treasure was mentioned, but it convinces the Doge to set sail for Constantinople. And on July 17th, 1203, the Venetians broke into the inner harbor of the city, carrying Alexius, who would become Alexius IV, displacing Alexius III, who was currently sitting as the emperor. When Alexius III finds out what has happened, that the troops of Venice are in his harbor, he flees the city with much wealth, much booty. And Alexius IV is crowned the new emperor in Constantinople. However, he is wildly unpopular. The locals take great offense that the Latins have come in and displaced their rightful emperor, and that this usurper is now on the throne. They have no interest at this point in reconciliation with the Latin Church, and they simply want Alexius IV and the Crusaders gone. Alexius IV fails on his part to fully live up to the terms of the agreement with the Doge. He gives only half of the money that he had promised and none of the troops. So the Doge and the Crusaders waited out throughout the end of 1203 into early 1204. And then in April 1204, Alexius